For many of us navigating grief, we prefer to have different resources that can help us. Some people prefer to connect with others one-on-one. Some people prefer to connect with groups. Some people prefer to watch videos like this. And some people prefer to read. And you might even have a combination of some of those resources as your support system. All of them are okay. So let's walk together, and I'll share with you 5 good books that you can pick up today that can help you along this journey. Hey friend, welcome back to Grief Questions Answered. I'm Eric, and it's my goal with these videos to share everything I've learned about how to survive, find support in the loneliness of grief, and how to intentionally get back up and live beyond the loss of a loved one. If this grief tip doesn't help you today, I am confident it can and will help you at some point in the future, so be sure to save this video to watch later on. Today's question comes from Michelle, and she asked me, what resources can I read that can help me along my journey? And Michelle, you asked a very wonderful question, because as I was saying at the beginning of this video, there are many different ways that we can get support on this journey. When we feel alone, I know that when I lost my daughter Zoe, I felt all alone in a lot of ways. I had people around me. I did have a support system, and yet I was yearning for more than just having conversations with people. I am a consummate learner. I want to learn about how things work. I want to understand why it's happening and what I can do about it. In this case, when we lose a loved one, asking why, we're not going to get many of those questions answered. Instead, what we do get answered is what? What am I going to do about it? And so in that context, I sought out some books and some resources that I felt were really helpful. And by the way, I'm going to share 5 with you today. In future videos, I'll share 5 more resources. I'll just keep going because I've done a lot of reading. I've done a lot of research. I've done a lot of podcasts where people have shared their books with me as well. And each one of those has just presented me with yet another resource that, even if it provided me with one helpful tip, it made the difference. And so on this video, I'm going to share with you 5 books that I recommend for you that I think you'll find will be very helpful. Now, the first book, I'm just starting this book, but I've heard a ton about it, and many of you people know this author. His name is David Kessler. He and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote the 5 Stages of Grief, and recently in the last few years, he wrote this book called Finding Meaning, the 6th Stage of Grief. I'm really interested in this book and understanding what the concept of finding meaning is, meaning finding meaning in your life, again, after loss. A lot of us, when we lose a loved one, we are unsure of what's next for us. We feel like we've lost our purpose. We've lost our meaning for being here. And in this book, David shares the ways that you can restore that meaning in your life and carry on after the loss of your loved one. The next book is a little bit more personal for me. It's Option B, and here's why. So a few years ago, I was at work. I saw this on the elevator going down for lunch on the display screen in the elevator that there was a new community that was created on Facebook called Option B by the COO of Facebook. Her name is Sheryl Sandberg. Sheryl lost her husband Dave while they were in vacation in Cancun in 2015. And over the next 18 to 24 months, she spent time with psychologist Adam Grant writing this book and subsequently creating this community on Facebook that was to give people some resources so that they could navigate their way through their grief as well. And, the premise of Option B is that if Option A isn't available to you any longer, meaning your loved one, then what's your next best option, which is Option B. And that's helping you to decide what that is and to put that in place. I found this book super helpful. I have learned so much from that community. I became part of that community. In fact, when I got back from lunch that day, I signed right up and I was supporting that community as a moderator for many years. And so it's a fantastic book. I recommend picking that up. The next book is by a favorite of mine, a person of mine. Her name is Christina Rasmussen. And a couple years ago, I was on her podcast and she shared with me her book. And I absolutely love this book. It is so practical. She has such a wonderful insight on what it means to navigate your life after losing a loved one. And look, each of us, anybody that provides resources for those of us that are navigating grief, there's always something inside of these resources that nudges you ahead just a little bit. Even it might even help you a lot. And her book, Second First, is another fantastic resource that I recommend for you to pick up. It's a very quick read, and if you haven't done so, find her podcast. I will put the link for her podcast in the description of. But just a fantastic book. The next book that I want to share with you is a book that somebody gave me very shortly after I lost Zoe, and I'll be honest, it sat on my shelf for about a year and a half before I even picked it up. Again, this is why it's so difficult when we lose a loved one that maybe we don't want to read, but for each of us, our journey is different, and there's different things that help us. And so when I got this book, A Guide for the Bereaved Survivor, I didn't pick it up, but when I opened it up, I was astonished at the clarity this very short book, which is not even 80 pages long, shared with me about how people respond, how we respond to loss in those early days, from the shock and the fear and the numbness and all of those aspects of our life that get upended. And it's written by Bob Baugher, Baugher, and again, it's called A Guide for the Bereaved Survivor. He's a doctor. I would pick it up and go through that, because it really kind of shows you what is normal in grief despite it hurting so much. The next resource, next book that I want to share with you, again, comes from a podcaster. Her name is Heather Stang. She published a book a few years ago, which is From Grief to Peace, and it's a guided journal for you to navigate your way through your grief. It's almost to write about your grief. I find it to be highly helpful, though, in the sense of knowing when I flip through it and I look at the resources in here, it's asking a lot of thoughtful, open-ended questions that will help you heal. And this is a guide and a journal that I have given to a lot of my coaching clients, because I find that it's so helpful to, again, find resources that help you. And look, some of them have filled it out, some haven't. We're all different. I'm just providing this as another resource. But I'd like to offer one more resource. I know I said I was going to do 5, but I want to over deliver here, and I want to give you one more resource to consider reading. And it's my book that I wrote a few years ago, A Sherpa Named Zoe, How to Walk Through Grief and Live with Intention. I was unsure about writing this book back in 2017. I had a lot of apprehension. I wanted to share my story of Zoe. I wanted to share the things that I had done to navigate my grief early on, how I survived first, then I got back up, and then I decided to live after the loss of Zoe so that I could honor her and myself at the same time. And when I set out to write this book, I actually just had a series of stories that were constantly swimming around my head. And I would share those stories with Zoe's friends, or I would share those stories with my friends and other people. And my coach asked me one day, he goes, "Eric, why haven't you written a book yet?" And I thought about it, and I'm like, well, I don't know how to write a book. And yet when I sat down and I thought about what people really need when they're navigating their grief, is just resources that help them connect with the loss, knowing that there are better days ahead for you. I know this isn't easy. Navigating grief is just one of the hardest things that a human experience presents to us. And And if you're watching this video, either you've lost a loved one or you know someone who has lost a loved one, I would invite you to pick up a copy of this book. And just knowing that my goal is just to help you. And I know videos can help. They can offer little tidbits of guidance, but a book can actually help you in many ways. One, because you can read it over and over again if it really resonates with you. So just as a recap, so for Michelle, look, this is just a handful of the books, okay, that are available to read. And you don't have to read any of them. You don't have to read all of them. You can read one of them and get a ton out of it. And I can't necessarily say that any of them are better than the other ones. They each provide their unique perspective, but they're all, including my book, they're all written to guide you through this aspect of grief where you might feel like you're stuck. And so, as always, I hope this helps. If you have a question for me, please let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't done so yet, click that subscribe button, as that is one of the best ways to get notified of new videos just like this and to show support for the channel. So let's keep walking together, and I'll see you in next week's video.